Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for coming today, for joining us in this webinar about sustainability in long term in electric mobility, advancements in public policies in cases of study in Latin America and the Caribbean. My name is Janina, and I will join you in this session as a moderator. If you can please go to the next slide. So we can begin. There are some rules regarding the webinar. First, if you can help us with adjusting your name in Zoom using your name and last name as you can see it here, plus the organization you belong to. Also, let me comment that this session is being recorded for purposes, and at the end of the presentations of today, we're going to have an open environment for our three speakers, so we can do a Q&A section in simultaneous. You can ask your questions, raise your hand, and activate your microphone. But also during the session, you can activate the Q&A section and ask via chat. Now I'm going to go to Daniela so she can help us with the instruction regarding translation and its activation. Daniela, can you please let me know if you're here?
Hola, buenas tardes.
Hello, good evening, everyone. Happy to be here today.
Bueno, la idea es que puedan tener la
Well, the idea is that you are able to open simultaneous translation during this event. In that sense, let me ask you if you can please go to the bottom of your page. You'll see a globe that says translation. Once you see that, you will have the options of listening in, and you can choose the option of Spanish or English. If you can't see it, you can especially use the 3 points at the bottom. You'll see the item more, you choose interpreting, and you choose the option of Spanish or English.
Hi, everybody. I do ask you today to go down below to the bar and just look for the globe symbol that is going to appear as interpretation and put the option listen into English. If it doesn't appear like that, you can go into the symbol down below that is 3 dots, put interpretation option and go into English. If you have any doubts or questions, just go to the chat and we are going to help you out with interpretation option.
If you have any questions or issues, please put it in the chat and we will support you and help through the chat so you can listen to this event. Thank you so much, Daniela. Let's continue to the next slide, please. Well, very briefly, this is the agenda for this session. We will begin with the welcoming words provided by Ramses Morante from the UNEP. Then we're going to have 3 presentations where we are going to talk from the concept of battery end of life of electric vehicles to the regulatory frameworks and several cases of application, plus some specific cases in projects of second life and initiatives of scrapping in the region. And after these 3 presentations, we are going to continue to a space of a Q&A where you can ask your questions directly to the speakers in English and Spanish, however you need, or you can also provide our questions via the chat. And finally, we're going to close with the thank yous from Marcela Castillo. Let's go to the next slide. Thank you. And we can begin with the welcoming words by Ramses Morante, a specialist in sustainable mobility from the UNEP. Thank you, Ramses. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here today. In the name of the UNEP, known in English as UNEP, I welcome you to this webinar dedicated to long-term mobility of electric mobility in Latin America and the Caribbean. Electric mobility is moving forward really fast in the southern globe, not only with buses and cars, but also with motorcycles and electric vehicles in general. This transition creates climate benefits, but also new environmental challenges. There are no regulatory frameworks that are adequate for the battery end of life and electric vehicles. Without clear rules, batteries may end up in landfills or being recycled informally with great risks for health and the environment. Since 2021, the program use is the electromobility in the four regional platforms in support and investment in electromobility, including one for Latin America and the Caribbean, with an investment close to $170 million, including 42 financed projects by the GEF in several countries. This program works with several global business partners, including the IGA, the World Bank, the ADD, EBRD, the Center of Sustainable Mobility, among others, to create knowledge, guidelines, tools, and, for example, the Mobility Toolbox. This webinar aligned with the global work with the PNUMA of the UNEP to create public policies, regulatory frameworks, and operational solutions for the recollection, repair, and reuse of second life, formal recycling, and traceability of batteries. The purpose is to support the region countries so that electromobility is clean, efficient, and truly sustainable. We invite you to ask your questions, your reflections, and experiences that may create more dialogue. Only collaborating we can create public policies that anticipate the challenges of this transition and guarantee a safe handling and sustainable of the end of life of electric vehicles. We thank you for your participation and your commitment to a more sustainable mobility. At the same time, we extend an invitation for the following sessions. With these, I formally start this webinar. Thank you, Ramses, for that speech. Let's move on then with that invitation to the first presentation of today by Renske Schuitmaker, who is a program management officer from the UNEP, and her presentation will talk about the battery end of life. Also, she will talk about the UNEP program and use EVs and the particular case of the Seychelles program. And I think that you can start sharing your screen.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me and see my screen.
I think that we are seeing the first screen, so maybe we need to stop sharing to allow you to share your screen.
Okay.
Now I think that you can share your screen.
Sorry, now I need to. So it says I'm sharing. Okay, let me do it again.
Yeah, please.
Meanwhile, this presentation will be in English. So for those who need it, you can activate the interpretation in Spanish.
Can you see my screen?
We can see your screen, Renske.
Okay. And if I'm going to the next slide, you can see my next slide as well. Just checking.
Yeah, we see it.
Okay, great. Good afternoon and good morning, everyone. It's great to be here. My name is Renske. I lead at UNEP the program on used EVs and battery end of life. The first slide you're seeing here, I don't think it is new information for many of you, because I think many of you are working in electric mobility and you're well aware that the transition to electric mobility is already happening in the global south. Many or large volumes of electric cars, buses, and two-wheelers are already spreading rapidly across the global south. And while this is a great development, it's absolutely necessary for us to mitigate the climate crisis that we're all facing and to help countries to become energy independent. It also creates another challenge, namely how to deal with those EV batteries when they reach the end of their lives, because they contain a lot of harmful chemical materials. Sorry, next slides.
Disculpen, voy a pasar la siguiente diapositiva.
Process ended. Sorry, just checking. So I can't go to the next slide now.
Voy a pasar la siguiente. Me avisan si la pueden ver.
Apologies for this. So as I was saying, it creates another challenge, how to deal with batteries when they reach the end of their life. Because what happens when EVs are deployed without a plan for this? Well, we basically see a linear supply chain where the EV battery goes from the production stage to the use stage, and then when it's been fully used, it will either go directly to a landfill, or in the global south, we also see a lot of practice of informal recycling. So that means that the batteries are being recycled either literally in people's backyards or in uncertified facilities with no proper health and safety measures in place, which has quite some consequences for local communities as well as the environment and public health. So instead, what we need to look for is EV battery circularity. It is key. In a circular supply chain, like you can see in the picture here, the goal is to avoid the final waste, the hazardous waste, and the landfilling stage you see here as much as possible. So in a fully circular supply chain, basically the term waste does not exist. Because before the EV battery would get to that stage, first it's being repaired as much as possible. If repairing is no longer an option, then there options for reuse or repurposing could be explored, for example, by using the battery in, let's say, an electric bicycle or in stationary storage facilities. And then when that is no longer an option, then the battery should be recycled, but in a responsible way and in a formalized way. Well, this is all, it's complicated to achieve, and you can only achieve this when you have proper regulatory policy frameworks in place. So policy is really key here to achieve this. And maybe a last thing to say on this little introduction in the topic is that a closed loop supply chain or a circular supply chain is not a success story unless the recycling process minimizes harm. And we can take some lessons learned here from lead acid battery recycling that is currently, and how that is currently going on. So lead acid batteries, as some of you may know, are, for example, the 12-volt, the small 12-volt batteries that we have in our cars. There are a lot in two-wheelers, also electric cars. Actually, all car brands besides, except BYD and Tesla, are also using lead-acid batteries still. So it's a massive market. But from a circularity perspective, they're very successful. So I think the estimates are that about 95% of lead acid batteries are being recycled globally. So it's really a massive success from a circular perspective, almost unparalleled. However, it has a really bad reputation. And that is because it has very large impacts on the environment and public health. Most of them are being recycled in the global south in informal settings. And currently it's, for example, to take some numbers, they're causing lead acid battery recycling, 86% of global lead production comes from lead acid batteries. And the public health impact is that it currently causes more premature deaths, so lead acid poisoning, than HIV, AIDS, malaria, and tuberculosis combined. So it's a massive scale we're talking about. So in that sense, we really need to do better with lithium-ion batteries and the EV batteries, and learn from this as well. So what is UNEP's stake in all this? Well, Ramses actually introduced it already quite well, so I'll keep it very short. But just to say, at UNEP, we have the Global Electric Mobility Program. You're all, I think, or many of you are even participating in this program because we're supporting 57 countries with the shift to electric mobility. But since a few years, we're getting more and more questions from many of the countries. We're saying, okay, now that the electric vehicles are actually coming, how do we deal with this end of life question? So it's quite a big concern for many countries. And that is why we started this Use EVs and Battery End of Life program. It is, well, some of you who know the global e-mobility program structure, it's basically structured in a very similar way. And it's also part of the global electric mobility program. So we have a global work stream where we develop knowledge products and trainings, but we're also engaged in regional at the regional level, for example, through these regional platforms, but also by pursuing regional harmonization of policies and regulations. And then the core of the program is the national part, so supporting countries directly with the development of national programs, where the main focus is on the development of policy frameworks on this topic, and we also look at pilots. So currently, 36 of our e-mobility projects, country projects, have components on battery end of life. You see the countries in your region listed here. Actually, all of those countries are GEF7 countries, which means in the GEF7 program, the end of life component is really focusing on an initial sort of scoping exercise to understand, what are the needs for a battery end of life policy framework. So really the initial scoping exercise. And I think some of the projects have finished already, some are still ongoing. But what is very exciting is that we have a new project coming up that's actually starting hopefully next month. It's planned for starting next month, where we're going to look into or do a scoping for a regional battery hub and spoke system in the Caribbean. And so let me explain a bit about this and why UNEP is looking into this. Well, we see that quite some countries are struggling with the fact that because there are still relatively low volumes of EV batteries at the end of life, it's difficult to find businesses willing to engage in this topic to take care of the end of life process because there's a poor business case. And we want to look into a regional hub and spoke system for EV battery collection and processing because we feel this could help to create, if you combine these volumes, it could help to create those economies of scale that you need for a proper business case for it to work in practice. You could also think of collaboration on administrative efforts. For batteries, these are quite heavy, as some of you may know, because they're classified as chemical waste under the Basel Convention, for example. So there's a lot of administration involved if you want to move a battery. We think that this is particularly a promising system for SIDS, for small island developing states, such as in the Caribbean region, because these countries are often quite remote and relatively small. So even if, let's say, 100% of their vehicle fleet would be electric, they still would struggle to find volumes big enough to make it worthwhile for businesses to engage. Already today, they're also struggling, for example, to find ships willing to use batteries. And there have been several cases where batteries are then stuck on the islands, just being stockpiled because there's no solution for it. So such a battery hub and spoke system might offer a solution for this to create those economies of scale. And that's what we want to start looking into. It's a very first step, and you will all definitely be kept in the loop through this regional platform. Of course, with the Caribbean countries, we will engage on this as well and involve. And if it's successful, we can potentially replicate it to other SIDS regions as well as mainland regions. Okay, I'm just checking on time. Okay, I think I'm just gonna do this really quickly. I have I prepared 2 examples of battery end-of-life projects we're doing to give you an idea. But in the interest of time, I'm just going to go through the Seychelles one really quickly. And the next one was on India, which I will just then skip for today. So on Seychelles, this is a GEF7 project that we finalized end of last year. We were looking into extended producer responsibility mechanism because so the Seychelles is a SIDS country in the Indian Ocean and faces very similar challenges as the one I just explained in the previous slide. So when we started engaging with them, there was very clear indication that they really wanted to have a solution, to deal with these end-of-life batteries, and the extended producer responsibility, or the EPR mechanism, gives promise to offer that, because it can give clarity on who is responsible for the end-of-life management, which actor. Which in the case of Seychelles was decided that would be the EV importers and dealers. They would be responsible. They selected a form, so there's several EPR types. The preferred one in the case of Seychelles would be a financial EPR, where the producers, so the importers and dealers, would be responsible for covering the cost associated with base management, but they wouldn't do the actual operational handling of that. That will be instead allocated to another organization called a producer responsible organization. But maybe just to finally say on this, I think it stood really out that all stakeholders on the island, governments, waste pickers, recycling companies, car dealers, everyone was very enthusiastic about this solution, and they really wanted to have the solution because they all saw the issue. So there's a lot of motivation for this, and I hope it could be an inspiration maybe for also some of the, in particular, Caribbean islands, but also some of the other countries. Okay, let me then skip the next slide and move to the final slide. Just wanted to quickly highlight the next steps in our battery end-of-life program, what's coming up for you. And we have 4 knowledge products in the pipeline that are currently being developed. One is a scoping study on current end-of-life practices to understand, okay, what's really going on right now when the batteries reach end of life. Second one is on EV import standards. So helping us determine, okay, if a country wants to set a standard for secondhand imports, should it be state of health? Should it be mileage? Should it be age? What would be most appropriate to still have good quality EVs coming in? Then we're looking at a used EVs and battery end-of-life regulatory toolkit, and finally a chemical impact assessment report. So stay tuned on that, and we'll definitely share them with you when they're ready. And finally, training. The next training in your region that is coming up is the LAC Regional Platform Meeting in May in Panama City. So you'll hear more about the details of that in due course. Thanks a lot, and look forward to questions later on.
Thank you, Renske. I think that we can move on with the next presentation. I already have a couple of questions, but we're going to leave it to the Q&A session.
Thank you very much. We're going to go to the next presentation that is going to be given by Rafaela Craizer. She is like Technical Director of BlackForest Solutions, and she's going to be focusing on the application of the REP law in Brazil and also advances on the uses of varieties in the Caribbean. So Renske was speaking a little bit about that, and she's going to speak more about it. Go ahead, Rafaela. Thank you very much for today. Thank you very much, Janina, and good morning to everybody. I'm going to see if I can share my screen. I think you need to stop sharing the screen, you guys. Just please confirm it that everything is working correctly. Can you see it now? Yeah. Well, I wanted to say thank you to Renske because he was going to be able to help me out with the presentation that I'm going to do today, actually, and to give a little bit of a heads up of this some information that we're going to speak today. Some things are kept a little bit different, but a couple of things are going to be like very different from the responsibility of the producer. That is quite different, and it's something that Brent also very said before. And how is everything working in Brazil and the recycle of batteries that we're going to do, and how we are going to do the processes in the Caribbean islands. So we're going to see a little bit of an introduction. We're going to see a couple of the like slides that we're going to have today that we're going to focus, and we're going to see the advances that we're going to be working here on the Caribbeans and some like final considerations that we need to focus on. As she said, Janina, before, I'm like directly technical of BlackForest Solutions. There is going to be like focus on technology and circle. Like understand we're part of a group that we're going to be doing, and that is called BlackForest Solutions. That is part of like operational arm of our extended responsibility of the producer. And in this sense, we do have some local entities that are going to be focusing on in Kenya, in Zambia, and the Emirates that they're going to be able to manage the volumes and the type of like weighted that we're going to be doing depending on each legislation. And the things that we want to do is going to share very briefly what we are going to do like in the production of the market ERP and how we're going to be focusing on that on Brazil and on the batteries in order to see the state that we are in the countries that we're working in the Caribbeans, but also in all the countries that we're working right now. And of course, we're going to be focusing on the implementation on based on our experiences and how this has been done on the region and in the country too. So let's start with the subject of the batteries rep RP. The reason why we're all here today, of course, we have been showing it like very extensively in the past, and the people that know about it is that this like the growth of the system and the percentages we're going to see like the electrical vehicle battery market, and it's like a global graphic that we're going to see what is the information of the Caribbean that is more than 187% in 2024. And in that sense, other than that, there is a lot of interest. And of course, on top of the augmentation of the volume of varieties that is going to be additional of the one that we have right now, the augmentation comes from the growth of the electrification, and the augmentation of the life of the varieties comes from the reutilization, reusage of the varieties and our systems, and of course, how we are going to reuse it in other things. And of course, you know that the lithium batteries are the ones that we're going to speak in right now here, and also the plum batteries, there's going to come like risk, environmental risk of security. And of course, you have seen that before, and especially with the battery that has been exploded in the plane, all something in, and also you have seen the problem with having on the bags the lithium battery. So now it's pretty unsafe. And couple of years from now, we have had a lot of conversation from the reuse of critical materials. In Europe, we have just launched, it's not a legislation, but like guidelines speaking about the importance of how it's like criticals. Brazil has just closed an agreement with India about the issue. So it is something that we are like speaking a lot about this, and it's a very hot topic at the moment. Well, the RP law in Brazil, and let's start with that, with the basic ones. The RP law in Brazil is from 2010, and it has been like implemented by many years now, and it is used as an example for Latin America. The problem with the law in Brazil is that it's a national policy that we're going to see how we are going to reuse material, and we're going to see that it was the material that we're going to develop the shared responsibility for the cycle of life. So that means that this was a whole progression and the way that the concepts are going to be done under this initial law. So in that sense, the APR law is going to be done through decrees that is going to be based on this law. So in that sense, we do have this responsibility that is going to be, and the fact that it's going to be a shared responsibility that is going to be done under the EPR, that is going to be very complex because, as we said, that this is going to be like somebody that is going to be managed by two
sides, and it's very difficult. We don't have like one main responsibility of this situation. So that is part of the lessons that we have gathered in this couple of years. What Brazil has done in the past is that, on focusing on batteries, is that we do have like inverse logistics that is going to be mandatory for batteries, and we do have like recollection system for small batteries. For example, the one that we use like us as normal users, but we still do not have under our legislation a specific law or a decree that is going to be done for electrical vehicles. So this is going to be like between like sector agreements and collective agreements. But as you can see right now, that is the main and the principle of the shared responsibility between the industry, um, waste management, and privates, and all those roles have to be defined in order to be fulfilled for everybody. So in that sense, for the batteries, we do have an EPR, very specific and consolidated, but we do have some batteries that are like acid batteries and lead batteries. So we have to manage that. And we do have a couple of problems, and we do have like voluntary points. There is going to be like, we call it PEV, that is like voluntary delivery point in Portuguese, and that is going to be like different like restoration of like the residuals and all the waste, and you can put it, and especially in a country when we have like a federative country where we do have all decrees are going to be working by state, and the entities that are going to be the waste management entities, they have like different ways to do it in each state, but they are responsible in order to create the infrastructure necessary in order to have these points, and people can bring their own batteries, the normal users, to these points. The lithium batteries and the ones that are used for electrical vehicles, EV, are still being seen how we're going to manage them in the future. And we do see like a flow of electronic residuals in Brazil, and the way that we're going to do it in exploitation. Even though we saw that Brazil is very, very big, we do not have like a very strong recycle industry for this type of situation. And this happened because this doesn't work very well. It works, but doesn't work very well. On the point that the process of recycling is going to be actual, like efficient. If a person is going to recycle, for example, their computer or their laptop, and there's going to be maybe in a positive value of the fraction that they have. For example, if you're going to give like an acid variety, the management, but if you're going to bring like a lithium battery, and depending on the other material that it has, the cost must be negative. You may pay it in order to recycle. The process exists actually, but it's not very beneficial, and it doesn't work perfectly. And as we said here, and we're going to like create like a different structure, and we're going to try to shrink that gap between the different like levels of like cultural level where we do have to be better. And as I said, we do have like a national ERP. We don't have it yet, but it is under discussion right now. And the group said when is going to be out the law, and it's very difficult to know that. From my point of view, I don't think it is going to be able to be done in this year. And it's not like a priority issue right now in the country. We don't have like goals of recollection on the year. When we have a decree, we used to have like some goals into 2025. Those goals were not updated. They still like work as a base, but we don't have it like updated. And it's something that is not going to be done yet for 2026. And we don't have number for 2026 yet. And what we do have is we do have like a company in Brazil that they have the contract responsibility as like producer and importer and exporter. So if I buy a vehicle, like an AV vehicle, I do have the right and the responsibility, the show responsibility to bring back the battery to the producer when I finish to use the vehicle. Even if I sell it, we have to bring it back to the company, to the EV company that that I bring it, and it's like a linear production between the importer and exporter and the sellers that have to be like a shared responsibility between all of us. And the responsibility is quite limited. I'm going to share like three initiatives that we had, but we have not been able to reach the numbers and the necessities that we have in Brazil because Brazil already has like consolidated capacity for lead acid varieties and we can manage it without any problem. And we do have like emerging capacity for lithium ion recycling. We do have like advanced recovery processes from hydrometallurgic steel is limited. And we do have some different numbers. And I think I'm going to show you the companies that are much more known in the country, like Cobad, Energy Source, and Reject Energy. And Reject Energy is a company that is being managed by Lumanch from Brazil and it's like the head on investigation on that. So in order to close the Brazil issue, in order to have success of an EPR in a consolidated system as a politic in the country, we are going to have and we're going to need a company that is like an entity that is going to be in charge of everything. For example, Energy Source Markers, that is going to be the one that is going to be like the one that is going to represent everything, the logistic and the constellation of everything they are more important generally in management than the technology itself and the data reporting and traceability are essential for the success of the process and of course the treatment infrastructure. So there's a lot of issues for this small amount of time, so I pass it through very fastly because of that. But it's just to give you a little bit of context of what is happening in Brazil. And well, the management of waste in the Caribbean countries, because it's very dangerous because we're going to speaking about lithium batteries, only on that. We do have, there are countries that have like high dependency of deportation and like increasing like penetration of EVs. And we do know that we have it more and more and more. We're going to see how we're going to do it in these countries because this is the biggest country, this is the biggest amount of second use of EVs in the world, in the Caribbean. We're going to see some information from Grenada and St. Lucia, and we're going to see how are the numbers. And you can see from 2021, it has been created, like it's have been increasing essentially like very fast. What are these countries are doing? This is like the four countries that we work more in the Caribbean. And all of them are discussing right now the magical word is EPR batteries at the moment and how we are going to do this. We are working with Dominican Republic with the regulation of the EPR in order to adjust it in other type of batteries. And we already have a regulation for the re-existence, but we it's something that is very strong in the region right now, and we don't have like time in order to focus on these points. But I'm going to leave you like it's like a general information about it and how we're going to be management through each state. And from the state that you are, we can speak a little bit more. But you can see, like from this country, we are going to management this republic, like this politics, in order to have like more infrastructure, to have better and decentralized system, in order to be manage all of this, and to be able to have like this unique EPR decentralized system. And well, I would love to bring like a good experience from Costa Rica. This is the only country in the region that already has a recycling center of lithium batteries, and they use this technology like CINET, that is like the modular system of hazardous materials metal hazard materials, and you're going to see it from like crushing, separation of like mass, plastic separation, and the same way that they do it like in Korea or Europe. And you're going to see that we are going to be able to manage different type of lithium batteries. It could be like electrical cars, phones, and this is something very important because it's that they're already like getting importing batteries from other countries in the region, and they're going to do it. And I think they have like capacity of 1,000 ton a year, but it's very considerable. It's not a lot, but it's very considered for the size of the country. And they do have like an agreement with a Costa Rican company, and we do have that agreement, and they're like managing by itself. And I would love to share that point. And even though we don't have like a lot of infrastructure for recycling these type of materials, is a very good practice and example that I wanted to show you guys. And well, in order to close the subject, in the Caribbean countries, the gaps are advancing a lot. As you can see with the support of the UNEP and UNEP and work with different governments and without like consolidated system in order to create the second life of this component is going to be very difficult. And with the actors who already have that, and they are of course like very happy with electromobility and everything, but they don't do the management. And this is a question that they are going to be answered in 15 years and how they're going to manage. And this is something, a question that doesn't have an answer. So we have seen these structural gaps and the absence of EPR in the management of the batteries, absence of the structure in the practices without like technical standards. And that's something that, for example, you cannot like gape and like save up batteries for the future that you are going to use. You have to manage that. And some problems with like responsibility and of course limited capacity oversight and control. And this is a little bit of problems that we have seen on these structural gaps. And it's something that it has been done in our evaluation is that this EPR operative system and these standards and operational financial system like safe storage and standard intermediaries, like this is structural regional corridors of exports under vessel data and monitoring and reporting system based on data and capacity building of institutional systems. And has to be a little bit of a vision of what we have developed here in the Caribbean. And in order to finish, because I don't have much time, I do believe the importance of EPR is on, or at the moment, is a little bit of a few instruments that we do have in order to fight the structural gap that we do have in the system into the management of the varieties and recycle. Without EPR, it's very difficult in order to have a sustainable system in the future for these processes. Meanwhile, we're going to see how we're going to be able to have like logistic situation that is going to be under the cost that we can cover and following the legal and the public structure in order to have that. And they're going to be extracting the product to this country. It's going to be importing this product and exporting this product. And with that, you do have my contact there and you can see everything and ask me more. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to you, Rafaela. Thank you very much for your presentation and help us to learn to know a little bit more about the process that EPR is being done there for a couple of years. And we're going to jump into the next session of the session is Stefano Sacco, and is going to be the leader of the hazardous materials and waste management in vehicle, and is going to show you the second life of batteries, and of course, it's different like scrap initiatives in Latin America. Go ahead.
I'm going to share my screen now. Please let me know if you can actually see it. Can you see it? It looks great. Perfect. Welcome and good morning to everyone. First, I want to say a comment. It's so wonderful to start a presentation after that Renske and Rafaela did such a great introduction talking about regulations as well. You simplified my presentation so much. Second thing, as Rafaela mentioned, that in Brazil, the regulation of battery network is not there yet. I want to tell you that Chile today published the decree, the Supreme Decree that regulates the lithium batteries and lead acid batteries that was published this morning, if you want to check it out. And third, and regarding also to security and safety of batteries, it's a piece of information that we are working on, but the studies indicate that every 10 vehicles of internal combustion that are set on fire, only one electric vehicle in batteries is set on fire. So as you can see, it's still news, but a combustion vehicle is relatively more dangerous statistically than a electric vehicle. And with this, as Janina mentioned, I am Stefano, lead of CMS Minerals and Batteries, and I want to talk about two topics. First, I want to understand and talk to you about the differences between the treatment of electric vehicles and combustion vehicles, and particularly the process of scrapping. And I want to talk about the use of how we are using the batteries of electric vehicles. And as Renske mentioned in the beginning, they seem to be a huge problem, but they also present a huge opportunity for us. And I want to start with this phrase, in which I ask you if you knew that the material used in the fabrication of an EV and internal combustion vehicles are almost the same. So if we consider a internal combustion vehicle, the 73% of these vehicles is lead, then we have plastic, 16%. Also, most of it is reused. We have a 15% of minerals like aluminum and copper, and the rest of the 6% cannot be reused. It's liquid or other items that cannot be utilized again. But in short, 90% of a car can be repurposed. Now, mainly we understand that a car is a iron structure with a motor. We know that, but an electric vehicle without a battery is almost the same. At the time to extract the battery of an EV, you can see that the composition of a BEV and an ICEV is basically the same. This indicates that we don't have to reinvent any process to treat them because the process of scrappage that exists today are already enough. But it's important to point out that, for instance, the battery EV has twice as much copper than the ICV, because the process of scrappage should be able to adapt to this greater amount of copper. And because we are in a boom of the copper price, it makes more sense in the economical way. Now, with the purpose of having a general idea of the current regulations of scrappage, I want you to watch this diagram here. If you see the European Union and China, you will see that they have very similar pillars in intelligent design or ecological design, sorry. This means that they regulate from the fabrication of the vehicle. But California, which is a great reference in the United States and one of the global leaders in emission control, they regulate scrappage from the time that the vehicle is bought, is acquired. Now, they all have in common the traceability and the certification of the processes. Now, plus there's very little space, very little room for informal treatment. Other thing that is different is that the way that they finance scrappage processes in the European Union is hand in hand with the fabrication, and in other places we have more to do with the means of financing. Now, let's talk about the Latin American reality. And I want to talk about and ask you as well if you consider that the scrappage program is viable in our region, if traceability is too hard, etc. And one of the cases that answers these questions is that in Ecuador in 2008, sorry, there was a program. The idea was to clean the air and also alleviate the fiscal load in the state. The government created the outage of some vehicles, of light transportation vehicles, and integrated over 2,000 new vehicles that were more efficient. When you remove other cars, they reduce the consumption of gas, saving $61 million, sorry, until 2024. Plus, this amount of savings in gas does not translate into the impacts of public health and people in general. But the failure here was traceability. There were very few studies regarding traceability. There was a presidential decree in 2024 where the ICV were going to be replaced by EVs, and this plan is still being investigated, but we still don't apply it. Later on, the renewal of heavyweight loads in Colombia, they identified that one of the issues that the trucks were too old, they contaminated too much, and they didn't have much a good logistics in trans-frontier movement. But instead of prohibiting them, they created a new program for modernization of a load. It allowed for them for a transporting method that in the time when they acquire a new vehicle, they would discount the IVA which is a added value tax in Colombia, and they provided a bonus for the buying of said truck. Now, if the truck was or had over 20 years, the technology of emission filter was associated to a technology of the 1990s. Now, at the time of acquiring a new, more modern truck, we're talking about 2022, if I'm not mistaken, it would allow to change the emission norms to a Euro 6 or to employ, for instance, a new filtering system which reduced 99% of the emissions of the vehicles. Plus, it reduced in 15% the use of diesel per kilometer. And as you may understand, that all of this adds up and it is saving. And as I said, it's positive for public health to be able to breathe a better air, which is relevant. Now, let's go back to California. Not really going back, but it's always important to mention what they're doing. In there, in California, they have a program focused on social topics, like, for example, the Clean Cars for All program in 2019, ongoing still for 7 years. It's a very interesting program because they pay anyone that wants to give away their old vehicle, but also the subsidy rate is different for every family. If you have a very low income family that lives in a very contaminated area, the state will provide for you from $9,000 to $12,000 to change an old vehicle for an EV. Now, the payment for the vehicle and the installment of domestic charges. They democratize the electromobility in areas and sectors where people actually suffer with contamination. And on top of that, they could save almost 56 million liters of gas, and they have had that progress lately. It's very interesting regarding the use of gas and the reduction of emissions. Now I wanted to show you this diagram here that summarizes the example on a global level of scrappage, but I can see that we're a little bit delayed in the presentation and there's a longer part, so I'm going to mention only the important things. What I wanted to know that on a global level, there's a program of scrappage that are really successful. The second thing is that these programs require subsidies. And among them, in some of the examples, we have Spain, France, and China. And then the CMS team will share the presentation in which you can go into more detail with these examples. Now, one of the topics that I enjoy the most that Renske and Rafaela also talked about is the topic of the second life of the batteries. As you can see in this image, I don't know if you can actually make it bigger. You can see a battery of a vehicle that weighs at least 140 kilograms. This vehicle had an accident and the vehicle itself is a loss. It was scrapped. But at the time of recovering the battery, when we saw the battery state, it was almost new. It was almost 97% healthy, which means that it could be used perfectly again. And this shows us the next question, the center question of today. How can we reuse these batteries and how we can incorporate it to our daily life? Plus, this battery itself has a very special design because it has connectors that allow a fast exchange of batteries. As you can see, this goes at the bottom of the car. They are taken very quickly and this produce a package of batteries allowing for a fast exchange. Approximately 4 to 5 minutes, the battery exchange is done. And probably you already know, but I think it's very important to highlight this. And the concept of sustainability for the user starts before you think about the second life and recycling. It starts at the moment that you think how to maximize the use of a battery of a vehicle. And for example, if you have an electric vehicle of a 300-kilometer range and it's not completely healthy, that means it has almost 240 kilometers of autonomy. The first step of sustainability is to ask, can you comply with the demand of distance that you have in your route? Let's assume that a family takes 150 kilometers per day. With that, the battery has enough energy to go that distance. But in the opposite case, if in a fleet vehicle requires 250 kilometers a day, the battery would have problems. And still the solution in these cases, or the logic thought, does not indicate that you have to think about the second life immediately, but also if you can reassign this electric vehicle to a different use in which it does comply with the requirements, and also only after that start thinking about a second life. And that's important about sustainability. It depends a lot on the way the vehicle is being used. And now let's go check the national case. It's a very interesting case in Chile, is that in terms of norms in Chile that will knock down several processes, if you open or modify a package of batteries in an electric vehicle, it's null. And there's a startup that decided to create a system of portable storage of energy. And you can see here in the image that there are modules that can be seen in the car installed here. And through the design, you can create this infrastructure of modular charging. And this allows for charging in remote areas. Beside this, in the case of Colombia, which I think is a very beautiful thing, you can see Volvo and Dynamo, they use batteries of electric vehicles that had completed their cycle of life, and they added a photovoltaic system in all of these in an energy island, in particular to provide energy for a rural community. This particular use had a great impact because these batteries allowed for stabilizing the consumption of electricity and connect them to what would be known a refrigerator or a freezer. And with this, they habilitated a community area where people in that zone that did not have access to food or that had no electricity to freeze their food, they would have that available. It was a high impact use, and it's not really complicated, or maybe it was, but now it is not as complex to implement. They did all the management, they created the software, the hardware, they installed the solar panels, and all of this was done in Colombia, made in Colombia. Now, a huge case, it's the case of Redwood Energy in the United States. It's very interesting because this started as a company that was only for recycling, and after this, it became in one of the biggest companies in Latin America, of course, but also on a global level of treatment of second life items. And you can see the dimensions of this plant. As you can see on the right, this is a data intelligence center or of data processing, and you can see some people here. And in the same picture up, the center is on the right. So you can see the extension of this battery field. And where I am pointing at, these are all vehicles batteries set up in a very wide area. And added to that field, you can see that the batteries are taken from the vehicle and placed to a certain distance from each other that allows for security. And with a software and hardware developed by them, they connect this, and it allows that to feed two data centers. That's one of the areas that consumes the most energy. And Redwood particularly handles a lot of car batteries in the United States. They approximately cover for 70% of all the batteries generated over there. And besides starting from a point of recycling, they prioritize reusing before recycling. Now, for you to have an idea of the scale with the amount of energy that they produce and manage, approximately you could feed over 40,000 homes in a Latin America city. So truly, it's a very massive plant. And this also, I mentioned it for you to know and to integrate that the use or the second life of battery can be incorporated to many areas of society. For instance, Coldplay created an alliance with BMW to use batteries of electric vehicles to provide energy for their concerts. That's a very popular case. Then in Amsterdam, the Johan Cruyff Stadium, sorry if I said that wrong, it has backup system of elimination, and all of their events are 100% fed by used electric vehicle batteries, many of them provided by Nissan Leaf. After that, in mining, there are pilots to control and reduce the consumption of energy in mines, these second life batteries are managed and activated when the energy demand is higher on a country level and they provide energy at that time. First, reduces the cost of consumption of energy, and they also stabilize the consumption and demand of energy. And to finish with the examples, in the case of Melilla in Spain, it's a very interesting one because, in particular, they are an electric island. So they have an interconnected system, which is not really the name, but that is how it works in Spain. And Melilla, they don't have connection to that. They are fed by a external thermoelectric plant. And in that island, there's at least 90,000 people living there. So citizens, to solve this lack, to have more electric flexibility, they adopted 48 Nissan Leaf used batteries. And with that, 30 of them new, and they connected them to the network. They wanted that in the case of not having electricity, this system would provide them with energy for at least 15 minutes, which provides them with the time to restart the electric center and take back the service. Now that I'm about to finish, what I want you to have in mind after the presentation is that first, if we want that electromobility to happen and to be sustainable, it's okay to have EVs, but we also need to understand and extend their elements. So it's important to manage batteries under three main ideas. First, optimizing the operation. After this, thinking about a second life. And third, thinking about recycling. There's a very nice phrase that I read, which is the most sustainable battery is not that the one that you use the fastest, but the one that you use better. And the second point is that we need a system of traceability, of digital traceability, incorporated from day one, as Rafaela mentioned. The system is one of the requirements which needs traceability. At the time of scrappage of a vehicle, an electric vehicle in particular, we need to extract the battery. And for that, we need to understand its chemistry, how to use every module. And we also need to know and understand what's the process of recycling is specific for that battery. We need to understand in traceability, which there's not a lot of formal areas in that part. So it's an important topic for the region. And at the end, on a more macro area, countries should not import cheap raw material. What we need that recycling and second life happen in our region because minerals and batteries like lithium, cobalt, and lithium are very strategic and they need to create added value in our economy. Thank you for your attention. That was my presentation, and I will leave my email. I am open to your questions. Thank you, Stefano. As you mentioned, now we have the space for the questions Q&A. We can begin opening the mics for those who want to ask your questions. If not, we also have some questions prepared in the chat. If we can start checking them out.
I do invite Rafaela and Renske if they can come with us with your cameras because some questions might be answered by you guys. I think that more than one is going to be answered by you guys. I do have a couple of questions from Francisco Posada. The first one has to be with the closed loop supplies. That's something that we have been like asking about, some like the tariff, this problem, and it is a problem that we have at the end with the batteries that the battery is going to be produced in one country, it's going to be imported as a component for assembly or as a complement vehicle in the second country. At the end of the day, which country owns the battery? Just thinking about the main half of this model that you're going to be speaking, Rafael and Renske. I don't know if you have like any idea of how this is going to be approached, this issue. Who is the producer of the battery at the end of the day when we have like a producer of the vehicle or the producer of the battery? Who is going to be the owner of the battery at the end of the day and who is going to be responsible of manage it? I will invite you to give you your answer, please. Well, I was reading. I was not able to hear you very well. I don't know if Ramsa wants to speak, but from my point of view, what I know is the producer of the party but it's not him, it's the importer that it is responsible from the variety. And that is going to have the responsibility with that nation and that country. It's a very classic discussion. It's like with the country that is started to import a vehicle, and it said like it still doesn't happen anything, and we are not having like an EPR law, and we have seen this information with the producer. There we have clear challenges, of course, especially in the Caribbeans, because in the Caribbeans, a lot of people like import directly as a person, as like a natural person. I can go as Rafaela and go to import or to buy something from the US, a car actually, and just organize like the transport of the car to my country and pay the tax and everything. And that doesn't happen on the other countries, for example, in Brazil. We cannot do that. It has to be a company that has to be the one responsible to import something from another country because it's going to be more regulation on that, and we're going to have more laws on who is responsible for it. But at the end of the day, when it enters into the country, the one that brings the product into the country is the one that is responsible, and it's one that is like contaminated with the principle of like waste material and reuse. I can like complement a second to Rafaela, for example, the regulation on the European Union, once the producer creates a variety and then it comes to a second life, it stopped being from the one that produced the variety, and it has to be when the one that is going to be the person that is going to process the second life. So you lose responsibility when it has like a second life. And of course, then they have to manage like everything in order to assign the responsibility to the new person on the new entity that is going to be in charge of that. Thank you very much for that. I was remembering with the example that you gave, Rafaela, with like natural users that can import vehicles in the Caribbean. We do have some other cases in Costa Rica, actually, from people that have been able to import some vehicles from electrical vehicles in Costa Rica, and we have seen that that flexibility that exists in some countries can create more difficulties at the end of the day, in order to have like an EPR that is going to be successful, in order to see that responsibility in those communities where they have like natural people being the final importer. We do have another question. Remember, if you want to do like a question, you can just do it, and you can like raise your hand in the Zoom platform, and we're going to give you permits in order to have it. We do have a couple of questions about Brazil. These are like the end approach of the recycle process. So, for example, about the final step of exporting recycled products, do Brazil need to update exporting and trade regulations to move from EV recycled materials? And it has to be like, are those products exported at market prices, or they are lower, higher prices as recycled materials or not? Well, I guess that the question from Brazil is for me, I guess. Well, Brazil, we needed to update the regulation of the exportation and commerce in order to do the exportation and importation of electrical vehicles. I do believe that some points in these questions, that if we're going to be able to export like hazard like waste, even though we can recycle, we are the one that are like in the legal agreement, we are responsible for it. So either way, we do need to do the whole documentation that is going to be referred to that legal agreement. And then we have to see all the type of material waste in order that are pending of this type of authorization. If we don't have it, and if we don't have it on this green list, we're going to export it without any issue because we don't have any like a specific legislation. But if we speak about like battery, lithium battery and those that, we do have a regulation, and we do have to have all the regulation up in place in order to be able to export it with certain facility. We have few laws, but we do have laws. I was reading the question, I'm sorry to interrupt him, but about the prices, is it's changed a lot. It is very difficult to tell you a price, because if I work with a barrier that it is from nickel, that is going to be a higher price. If we're going to be able to export a barrier with phosphate, it's going to be comes in different activities, and it's going to come with certain number from China. It's going to already have like a negative number because we have to take that into account. The transport, the legal like permits and everything and all of that. So in general, what we do is we are going to look for the industries, and we do have the recycle. We have like a table of prices that are going to be specifically dependent on the chemicals that we have had, and we do have to ask depending on this battery and depending on the chemicals that it has in order to see everything. We do have that, and we do listen a lot of that with the Caribbeans. We need to see the quality and the chemicals and the cost and the prices, logistical prices in order to reach to a final price. Thank you very much for that. We do have another question that it has to be focused more on traceability and the specification of the state of health of the varieties and their second lives. And how is that point in Latin America? That is something that we have been detecting like a great gap in Chile. I don't know if you have seen any of those experiences for the second life of battery and the second user. Would you have like an entity that is going to be a certifier in order to give the user more confidence in order to achieve and to buy this product or not?
Maybe.
I can answer you a little bit about what we have with Energy Source, the company from Brazil, and the CEO from that center of recycle. He said to us that it doesn't exist in any part of Latin America, the capacity in order to certify second life varieties. We do have like an international organization of the UL and UN in order to categorize varieties, but either way, we do have like a big challenge on that sense in order to create a commerce of second life varieties to see like how we are going to measure that in order to see how much variety life does it have left and if they're like qualified in order to be sold. Renske wanted to set something.
Well, I thought it's maybe a good opportunity because I didn't have time to present our example of our India project that we're doing on battery end of life, which is actually exactly on this topic. Because at least as far as I'm aware, there are not any like actual traceability systems initiatives in Latin America yet. But I think besides the EU, India is now let's say, the second bigger initiative. And we're supporting them with our Jeff7 projects on this. They call it the battery Aadhaar. So that is something they're currently developing. And it's basically also a form of a battery passport. But what is interesting in the case of India is that whereas the EU battery passport is more focused on, let's say, the upstream side and tracing the origin of the critical minerals. In India, they're putting a lot of emphasis on the end of life part. So on also getting live updates on state of health data, but also tracing it across, the second life and the recycling process. So it's just, I think, interesting to share that it's a good initiative to follow if you're interested in the topic of traceability. And I think it's like Stefano also mentioned and Rafaela mentioned, it's a very important tool potentially to advance a circular EV battery agenda.
Thank you, Renske. I think that we have a hand on the chat.
I don't know. I don't know if anybody from the team can activate the audio from Friday that has his hands up. Friday, go ahead. Do you want to do a question? Thank you very much for like allowing us to participate, and thank you very much to all the panelists today. The use of life of varieties is a big challenge on a global level. It's a problem for sure. For the vehicles of high capacities, as are the buses, are the trucks and buses, we do see like a lot of potential of second life battery, and because of the amount of like save up of energy that they have. And we do think that we need to create a standardization of the battery in order to have like a information is going to be able to be used in a battery bank on the track and drop that is going to be able to take it in and take it out in order to have that use of battery. I wanted to ask if you know of any initiative in order to generate and to create a regulation about that in order to have all these batteries of like high big vehicles to have a second life? Do you know any country, any examples of that? I can answer.
Rafaela wants to answer, but if not, I can go. So, Freddy,
Thank you, Freddie, for that question. Yes, we do have like eco design or where the producers of the vehicles and the trucks are going to create it like the way that we take it off the truck out of the battery is going to be as easy as possible. In Brazil, they're going to incorporate a way in order to unplug the battery on the vehicles and trucks. If you add those two elements, we do have a vehicle that is going to be designed in order to be easy to disassemble and a manual that is not going to be difficult to implement, especially with like standardization, like implementation and all of that, is going to be much easier in the future. Thank you very much, Stefano. We do have a question for Renske.
About the necessity of developing a regulatory framework for the end of life, as ERP imposes the responsibility on the producers. What incentives from governments can be implemented, such as the producers can still see their production profitable?
Sorry, just if you could repeat the second half, because the translation was just switching. So I missed.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Which incentives from governments can be implemented, such as the producers can still see their production profitable?
Good question. I think, especially in the context of Global South, it's difficult, of course, to talk about subsidies. And I think that is why EPR is now being discussed as, especially if you talk about the end of life, because that's where investment need to be made. I know I've spoken a lot with a company in France who is doing repurposing of second life batteries. And I think for them, without an EPR, it's really hard to be difficult. I think there's, for example, in Europe, there are some, let's say, environmental taxation that is then being put on batteries, and it can be funneled through to these type of companies, but it's still not enough. So I think that's why, you heard Stefano speaking about it, you heard Rafaela speaking about it myself. So the EPR, I think, is now seen as a key mechanism to add to this, to at least appoint a financial responsibility to some party. But it will probably also not be enough. So it's probably going to be a combination of, seeing within the government, are there indeed is there already some kind of environmental taxation system in place that can contribute to this? Is there health and safety regulations or incentives somewhere that can contribute? It needs to probably be a combination of several measures, and then depending on the national situation and the budget, etc. But I agree, it's the end of life business case is definitely not easy. We're in a very early stage, and I guess we're all indeed trying to figure out how to finance and make it profitable, because I think there's not, also in, let's say, Global North, not yet many companies that can do that profitably today. But yeah, so it's a very valid question. I don't know if Stefano or Rafaela has any additional insights on this.
No, Renske. I think that was pretty much it. And I think we also strengthened a lot the importance of EPR. And to be very frank, it's not ideal. And I'm looking forward to improvements also in it, especially in the implementation on the ground. But it's the only tool that I think it makes most sense at this moment. It could be that something pops up in the future, but at this moment, it's the only way that I personally see on how to bridge this financing gap that we have.
Muchas gracias. Veo que tenemos un par de preguntas.
Thank you very much. We do have a couple of questions on the chat. The first one is, what are the responsibilities of the policy concept and how we're going to be able to start with the right food? I don't know, Remske or Rafaela, do you want to answer that?
Perdón, Janina, si puedes repetir.
I don't know, Janine, if you can answer, reset the question. The question they're asking, what is like the responsibilities of the Belize City Council and how can we start with the right food?
I don't know if Renske wants to start, but we did work with EPR in Belize specifically. We were working with the Solid Waste Management Authority to reinforce the deposit refund system that Belize already has. So Belize already has EPR. The deposit refund system is like a kit of EPR. It's under the EPR umbrella. It is not the normal path, or it's a bit unusual that you start with DRS before EPR, but it's doable still. So the idea is the same. Belize, for example, or people are collecting Coca-Cola bottles and getting them out of the landfill, which is of course not ideal, but this is how it's working in Belize. And the EPR component needs to start first with political will. Belize is practically importing things, so importing goods. To be honest, I don't know the market share of electric vehicles. We were working in Belize with the plastic waste, but it's basically importing and exporting material for recycling, for example, to Guatemala. Thus, what needs to come first, of course, is a combination of political will. The champions, as we call within ministries, people that are really pushing this topic further. This is for practicality, otherwise it's very hard that you move these things forward. And then starting these discussions with the private sector. In the case of police, the majority are importers. So the companies that are bringing the waste into the country. And the good side of the positive side of Belize is that it is a small country with not a massive amount of importers. So this is actually positive in enforcement and how to structure the legislation and do the stakeholder consultations that you have to do. But at the end, we need to start with legislative piece and everything that comes along the development of a law. I don't know if Renske wants to complement.
Muchas gracias, Rafaela. Y bueno, para cerrar, veo que hay una
Thank you very much,
pregunta.
Rafaela. In order to close, I can see there is a question if you were able to identify any country of the Caribbean in order to create this hub of these measurements of like EV batteries. I don't think so. I don't think that the project has started yet. Just to answer that very fastly. And right now we're going to pass to the end of our webinar. Thank you very much to everybody that has been here with us today, especially to our panelists today. We are going to give the word to Marcela Castillo, who is our Deputy Executive Director of SMS in Chile, in order to close the webinar. Go ahead, Marcela.
Thank you, everyone. Well, as you did say, I want to thank everyone who participated, also to the panelists, to every speaker that were here today. Thank you for sharing your knowledge on this topic. And to close this webinar, I would like to comment on what was clear today, which was also mentioned in our presentation. Now, the true sustainability in electromobility does not end only in terms of the vehicle, but also with increasing the amount of buying of these vehicles, but also there's a challenge of managing the life cycle as a whole, as we saw in the experience of Brazil, in Chiles and other countries of the Caribbean. And there are other challenges in the development, in the implementation as well of the EPR laws in each one of them. And also, as we mentioned, we could also see examples of scrapping and second life programs for these EVs. The focus of today's presentations is the main motor of the regional platform of electromobility, where there's a work of all the regions of Latin America and the Caribbean, all cooperating between the CMS and the UNEP. This is fundamental to ensure that all of these technical lessons become skills and real abilities in all of the countries of the region. I also want to invite all of you to keep this boost of articulation that we see and we defined and that was extremely supported in the Congress or the meetings that we held in Santiago in November last year, where many representatives came to the country of almost 11 countries of the region. And I want to invite all of you to keep collaborating just like we've been doing so far. And at the time, because the future of our vehicles and our electric vehicle fleets is being built from the first, second. Thank you to everyone who came, and I will see you the next time when we have another webinar on a topic of electromobility, second life of batteries, EPRs, and as Renske mentioned, probably in some event in Panama for some of the partners of the regional electromobility platform. Thank you so much.
Chao, gracias.
Bye. Goodbye. Thank you.